So this is going to be a conversation after Amber's day 8.
Yep, that's correct.
And I don't necessarily have anything in particular in mind. If you've got something to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that. I can probably figure something.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything in particular either, I think. I'm pulling up my sampling notes from today, but nothing jumps out to me.
The one thing that appeals to me, I guess, is the fourth beep. Because in the fourth beep, I thought you worked pretty hard at getting her to say, or getting her to describe whether this was a cognitive event or not. And you ended up with, I thought, a sort of a cognitive thing, and then when I took over, it ended up in a not cognitive thing.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be worthwhile to talk about how that happened.
Sure.
Not from the standpoint that Russ is right and Cody is wrong, but from the standpoint of it'd be worthwhile to figure out how it came to pass that it seemed to, at least to me, that Amber started out maybe in the cognitive arena, ended up not in the cognitive arena.
I think that's probably one of the only places in today's sampling meeting where thinking came up. The word thinking. She used the word thinking.
Yeah.
Which sort of follows our ongoing conversations about what to do about that.
Yeah. I thought the other thing that was interesting in today's sample is that we've seen a couple of samples today and several earlier of things that I would call creative sensory awareness, where she is seeing things that aren't actually the way they are in the real world.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, but I think maybe I can talk about that in a comment to the transcript.
Sure. Yeah.
If you have more motivation to talk about that than 8.4.
No, I think 8.4 would be a more interesting thing. I think it's more interesting from the perspective of you and I discussing sort of what that is. You know, I think the creative seeing is surprising, but not all that rare, I would say, right? I mean, it strikes me that it does crop up across participants somewhat frequently.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, I have found at the beginning of beep 4, and here it is. Number 4.
Okay, so number 4, I was still watching the same show, This Is Us, and I was seeing now the female Kate, and she was kind of also turned to left. It's kind of interesting, and her dress was the same or a similar color to the room she was standing in, and
so maybe I should, well, one way to do this is I could just talk out loud about what my reaction is here. Would that be a useful thing, or you got a better idea?
I think that's probably fine. I don't have a better idea.
Right. So what I would say here is her gestures here and her visage, to me, say this is a powerful thing. She's speaking from a position of power, of affective power, or puissance, or I don't know what word we want to use. I think I used that word once before. I think the last 10 years I've used that word twice now. But there's some power behind what she says, to my eye, here, or whatever. Here it is again.
And she was kind of also turned to left. It's kind of interesting, and her dress was the same or a similar color to the room she was standing in.
So to me, that her dress is the same color. All those gestures mean power, and in her power, whatever she's describing, it's a powerful deal. You agree? First off, just without saying more about it than that, do you agree with that? She's talking about something that has vividness or vivacity, or
Yeah, I agree with that.
let's watch it one more time.
And her dress was the same or a similar color to the room she was standing in. And
so in my apprehending of what's going on, and it's not like I'm talking to myself or whatever, but just when I'm watching or paying attention to what's happening here, I'm impressed with that, I would say. And that, I think, in my world, is likely to tilt me in the direction of some sensory or emotional thing, not a cognitive thing. When you're talking about something that's purely cognitive, you would say something like the probability of a type 1 error is 0.05, and you wouldn't say the power of a type 1 error is 0.05. You'd say the power of something that is purely cognitive doesn't have power behind it. I don't think that's what makes the analytical cognitive kind of thing. So I'm not saying that I'm predicting at this particular moment, 29:58. I'm not predicting that this is going to be a non-cognitive thing, but I'm being pushed, I think, by her in the direction of this being a non-cognitive thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
Well, yeah, I wasn't necessarily, and at the moment of the beep, that's kind of what I was seeing, like how she matched the room. But I wouldn't say I was particularly drawn to the blueness or anything that specific. I would just say that when I saw it, I was like, she matches the room.
And that, to my ear, what she says, let's listen to what she says right there.
I was particularly drawn to the blueness or anything that specific. I would just say that when I saw it, I was like, she matches the room.
When I saw it, it was she matches the room. So I'm in a direction, and I think you were too, because I think you worked pretty hard at trying to talk her out of cognitive, but I think that's a very difficult thing to do, and so I think you didn't work quite hard enough. You worked hard at it, but
I think there was something that, I know we'll get there in the interview when we rewatch the video, but I recall you asked her, I think, pretty directly, it's possible you can see and notice, right, in a visual sort of way, notice two different shades of blue, and you're not drawn to the blueness, but this is a totally visual kind of
right. I did
contrast, right, and versus analytical, right, like, oh, that blue is different than this blue or something, right? We might see it in the interview. That question crossed my mind, but the fear I think that came for me was I didn't want to put power behind the thinking, cognitive-y sort of stuff.
So, and we'll have to see when it gets there. But my recollection is that I said that after you had done the questioning, and so I felt the need to rebalance the playing field. So I thought we had drifted into cognitive, and I wanted to rebalance the playing field. But we'll see whether that.
Yeah. That's why I think this will be interesting, because I don't really remember. I agree with your assessment where, I thought I was really trying to test not push back, but really try to figure out what was going on here, not trying to leave it one way or the other. And she said cognitive, and then you came in and then suddenly it wasn't. So I thought that was kind of an interesting U-turn.
Well, that's what we're gonna try to tease apart here and see how that happened, and whether we should understand it as being Hurlburt being too pushy or too whatever.
Not, and I wasn't saying that. It was just kind of like a thinking, like, oh, she matches the room right now, kind of thing.
So there is the word thinking. She did use the word thinking.
Yeah.
Which I don't, which actually I didn't remember that at all. So I
Okay.
I think it's true that I don't even hear when somebody says the word thinking. I don't hear anything. I think I've trained that word out of my ear processing.
Probably for the better from the DES perspective. And is that, I know you had just said that, but I don't think I quite got it. How is that present to you? How is this present to you?
Like, it was like...
So my reaction to that question was, I thought that was a pretty good question. You didn't fall into the thinking trap, which I was probably worried about, but...
Mostly seeing again, but it was like a small sliver of it was kind of like this. Noticing that the set or the room that they had obviously designed for this scene was the same color as the or similar color, a matching color to the outfit she was wearing. Something like that.
Okay. So I'm both pausing. And by seeing, is that sort of similar to the last beep where, I'm watching what's happening on the screen, like you described the scene, and I'm just watching that? Is that okay? Yeah. But what I'm seeing, right, but sort of additional to that, what I'm taking it to be saying, Amber, is that there's some sort of noticing or recognition
of the colors of the scene. Like, those were, like, that stood out to me just maybe just slightly a little bit more. Like, I don't
know. Go back and hear that.
The colors.
I got a little distracted.
Noticing, what I'm taking it, but what I'm watching that, is that, okay. Yeah. But what I'm seeing, right, but sort of additional to that, what I'm taking it to be saying, Amber, is that there's some sort of noticing or recognition
of the colors of the scene.
So I was worried about that because I think recognition has the word cognition in it, and recognition is a cognitive-y thing. And I'm totally with you that you're trying not to be cognitive. I took that, and I was happy about that. Well, I come from her. I just think it's very difficult to do because the vernacular, when you're doing a comparison thing, makes it seem like this is going to be a cognitive comparison.
What I think it may have gotten lost with the audio playback, but earlier on when I asked her, I forget actually how it asked, but she had actually used the word thinking once early on, but then actually she said, I'm noticing the colors. She didn't use thinking again. And I think that what in hindsight now what's interesting is that, I mean, noticing to me that sort of fits in with this is a totally visual thing and I'm noticing, right, like the color contrast. So I mean, in that way, I think, it's plausible that we didn't talk her into that. But here, yeah, I was kind of like, oh, geez, like, I don't know how else to call this what she's talking about here without sort of falling into the trap of cognitive or thinking or something.
Well, I think it is difficult, and I think you're just going to have to work at figuring out. You can noticing is a pretty good word. It's not very cognitive. I agree with that. Stuck with noticing. Wait a minute. But the problem is it's not just you that have a predisposition to talk about these kinds of things in a cognitive way. It's Amber that has a predisposition to talk about these things in a cognitive way. And that's why, as a general rule, when I say about DES, it's a matter of trying to tilt. I don't try to make just a perfectly level playing field. I think I try to tilt the playing field slightly to counteract what I believe to be already there as a tilt in the other direction. So I think there is a tendency to go in the cognitive direction, And I think if you want to find out what the phenomenon is really about, somehow you have to tilt in the other direction in such a way that you don't force the person in the other direction, but you don't just collude.
Right.
And that, I think that is art. I don't know how to make a formula for that.
On that same, maybe on that same topic, the one thing that struck me today in today's interview for whatever reason, and I think this is something that you've articulated before, and this might be sort of a late insight for me, but one thing that I was noticing in today's interactions with Amber is that, part of the interview, like you said, isn't just to it's not just to create a level playing field, but like at this point in Amber's sampling where she's been doing this for a while and, we trust she's pretty good at the specificity needed as the prerequisites to this, right? The temporal specificity and working on the phenomena specificity. Part of our jobs as the interviewers is trying to work with her to bring into focus, for lack of a better word, right, her experience, collaboratively, both all of us trying to find the best description for it, right? The best words. It's not about the words per se, but the words as a means to get to better fidelity.
Yeah, I think that's
sometimes we offer that ourselves, right? And not in like we're trying to talk you into this sort of way, right? But I'm forgetting what beep it was. I think it might have been like beep 1 or 2, maybe, or I think it was
I think maybe you're talking about beep 2, where I
yeah.
offered a few alternatives where she was saying I was stopped, and I said suspended animation and things like that.
Yeah.
And the trick to that, I would say, is when you offer something like that, you have to genuinely prefer Amber to say, no, that's not right. It has to be offered in such a way that you would prefer yourself to be wrong. Because if you offer something and somebody says, yeah, that's it, you don't know anything. But if you offer something and somebody says, well, that's not quite right, it's this other thing, then you have learned something.
Right.
So I've got nothing against offering. What I have against, what I think is risky in the world in general, and DES in particular, is confirmation bias. I think confirmation bias is the root of many evils. And I think if you want to be good at DS, you have to ferret that out, and that's a lifetime endeavor. That's not something you can say, well, I'm gonna rid myself of confirmation bias.
Right.
That's like all those things are like delusions and presuppositions, whatever. You just have to work at them.
Yeah.
So if you feel yourself right, I've offered something and I'm disappointed that she doesn't go along with it, then you know that you haven't solved your confirmation bias problem.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing you to be saying is sort of the flip side to that, right? What was going on in that second beep, it was a second beep, is Amber struggling with trying to, clearly she's working at trying to say like what this, she started out talking about it as like a frustration, right? Or holding my breath, but she tried too to say, I'm trying to figure out what this thing was. And we're trying to work with her too to say, let's try to figure out what this thing is, right? Not in I'm forcing you into this, but I'm understanding you be saying this. Do you mean this or right?
Right. I thought that discussion was pretty collaboratively skillful. I thought we did a pretty good job with that discussion, because I think the topic of frustration, whether she felt something that the rest of the world would call frustration. If the average guy on the street felt what she felt, would the average guy on the street call that frustration? I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And but really, that's our job, is to try to figure that out.
Right.
If it's obviously clear, everybody in the world would call this frustration, then we don't have to worry about it. But if she's got what maybe is idiosyncratic view of frustration, then we got to try to figure out what it is that she actually means.
Right.
Which is why I do say that it's not about the words, but
yeah.
it is about the words at the end of the day. when we're trying to narrow down what we can say, that we understand. I understand what you mean, Amber, and Cody understands what Russ means when he's talking to Amber, and Cody understands what Amber means when she's talking to Russ, and both Cody and Russ think that if they write about what they said here, they can write about that in a way that will make sense to to some fourth person, not Amber or nothing to us. Words do matter in that arena.
Yep.
But we're straying away from beep number.
Yeah.
And I still think it's going to be, well, it's already spawned interesting discussion, so we should keep on going here and go back to see where we were.
Additional to that, what I'm taking it to be saying, Amber, is that there's some sort of noticing or recognition
of the colors of the scene. Like, those were, like that stood out to me maybe just slightly a little bit more. Like, I don't know how to describe that, but I wouldn't say I was drawn, maybe just
So I thought that Amber, in what you just said here, it was remarkably not cognitive.
And I thought that too.
Of the colors of the scene. Yeah.
But what I'm seeing, right, but sort of additional to that, what I'm taking it to be saying, Amber, is that there's some sort of noticing or recognition
of the colors of the scene. Like, those were, like that stood out to me maybe just slightly a little bit more. Like, I don't know how to describe that, but I wouldn't say I was drawn to the blueness per se, but it was more that it matched, and it happened to be the color that was matching was blue.
That is entirely sensory to my ear.
Yep.
And my thought process going through that is A, that it's sensory, and B, good for Cody, because he had set up a situation here. We talked about the word cognitive recognition as having a cognitive, but the fruit of the way to judge a question is in the answer. And her answer was right straight down the money sensory, which makes me think, well, Cody asked a good question, because I thought that was a good answer.
And we'll see how this plays out, but I guess my question is, right, like, as I'm observing this, I know how this ends, right, but I'm sure at this moment, Amber's presupposition is that this was a thinking kind of a thing, right?
I think her presupposition is going to eventually win, but at this moment, she has not caved into that presupposition.
Because I guess my question would be, I don't know what I'm going to ask next, but with this, let's pretend like we're back in the interview and I'm pausing it, right? I would like to think of how could I then not tell Amber, right? But share with her saying, that sounds like a sensory thing, right? That doesn't sound like, that sounds like an entirely sort of visual seeing sort of a thing. In other words, I think I'm wondering, we'll see it, but whether my questioning kept alive the thinking stuff longer than I ought to have,
So as you pointed out a few minutes ago, I'm eventually going to ask a question where I'm going to try to level the playing field and say, well, these things don't have to be cognitive. If I had been asking a question right now, I might have used a version. There's no script involved here, but I might have used a version of that same question, except it would have been backwards. I could have imagined myself at this time saying something like, well, there are two possibilities here. One is I'm looking at it visually, and it's all a visual processing, and the other is that it's a cognitive thing, that there's some piece of me which is doing the analytic. And I don't want us to think, as I said in the other, I don't want us to think that it has to be one way or the other. Both of those things can happen. But I would like us to tease that apart here. Does this seem like a visual comparison, or does it seem like there's a cognitive analytical kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay.
So you can push in a direction, but it's always a good idea, I would say, as a general principle. It's always a good idea to push in the direction that you think is the dangerous direction, because then if she pushes back against that, then you can be really confident. So if I had said something like that and she said, no, this is not a thinky deal, this is a,
Right.
then I would have been in a position to say with confidence and on to the next thing, I wouldn't have had to worry about it anymore,
Right.
because she would have, against my disconfirmation push, I guess you would call it, that this is a sensory deal. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I don't think there is a right way.
And I'm not asking for a scripted way or a right way, but it's more the recognition of, wow, yeah. I mean, because I think I even remember in that moment going, all right, like that's we're on the sensory track, or we're on the seeing track here, right? Like I'm like, this is not a thinking thing. I don't know how we again got into the thinking thing, but that's where I'm trying to correct that, or just to think about that in terms of, all right, how do I talk about it in that way with Amber without going back to that thinking trap, without going down that road again. I want us to avoid that.
So another way to do it would have been to say, well, this sounds like it's a sensory comparison without any cognitive. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
The risk of that is that if she says yes, then you haven't learned anything.
Right.
But at least you have made explicit that this is a sensory deal. If she says yes, then you can follow up and say, well, there is this other possibility. There's a little cognitive analysis in there. But then you can give a lecture about, cognition. When psychologists talk about cognition, they're not generally talking about something that's experiential. They're talking about some process that takes place, something outside of awareness or whatever. And
right.
So you can give whatever sides of the coin you think are necessary to put her in a position where she is not trying to confirm Cody's insecurities. That's really the bottom line. You don't want her to be doing something to be a nice guy to Cody. You want to have conveyed to her, the only way you can please me is to tell me about your experience as it actually was. And I'm unlimbering all the weapons that I've got at my disposal to try to help us do that. And to the extent that you're genuine about that, and then if she tries to please you, then she can only tell you about her phenomenon. That's the problem with categories. People use categories because it lets them off the hook. If we can fit you into a category, then we don't have to worry about me anymore. It's just between you and the categories. It's risky. So shall we go forward and see what happens? Mm-hmm. So where we are now is we think she's talking pretty sensory.
Yep. My main question is that noticing, or that how is that present to you?
Yeah, definitely seeing, and but I would say it's just a very little like thinking, like a thinking about it kind of thing. Like, oh, that matches, but I wouldn't say it was a whole process.
Can you go back?
It was just.
Can you go back to before I started talking? The end of her.
More than seem like.
Farther back.
No, that's good. That's good.
Those were, like that stood out to me maybe just slightly a little bit more. Like, I don't know how to describe that, but I wouldn't say I was drawn to the blueness per se, but it was more that it matched, and it happened to be the color that was matching was blue.
And is that noticing, is that a visual thing? Just another aspect of I'm seeing this, or something else? I guess my main question is that noticing, or that how is that present to you?
Yeah.
So the first half of that question was good. The second half I worried about a little bit.
Yeah.
It matched, and it happened to be the color that was matching was blue.
And is that noticing, is that a visual thing? Just another aspect of I'm seeing this, is for something else. I guess my main question is that noticing or that how is that present to you?
Yeah.
So I do have a risky, my risk detectors are jangling from the last part of that question. And I think the reason that they're jangling is that it makes it seem like there's a separable process. That question makes it seem like there's a separate noticing process. Mm-hmm. When I think she's been saying, I'm seeing this comparative blue thing, and that's a single thing.
Right.
Two aspects, two different colors out there, but the matchiness is a single thing. And then when you split them apart, like, well, what's the noticing about? And I feel your difficulty. I think this is we're in highly difficult terrain here.
Meaning the differentiations we're trying to make here are
the distinction is a fine one, mm-hmm. and it lives in the anteroom of presuppositions, of powerful presupposition. So to get somebody to talk straight when the dragons are right on the other side of the door, I think that's tricky.
Yeah.
And by the dragons, I mean presuppositions of
right. Just another aspect of I'm seeing this is for something else. I guess my main question is that noticing or that how is that present to you?
Yeah, definitely seeing. And
so I'm missing a word there. What did she say?
I'm definitely seeing. Is for something else. I guess my main question is that noticing or that how is that present to you?
Yeah, definitely seeing. And but I would say it's just a very little like thinking, like a thinking about it kind of thing. Like, oh, that matches. But it was.
So I can't. My heart palpitates when she talks like that. And I mean that totally literally. It's like I just worry about every word that she's saying in there. It's with the little bit she's talking about, and like I don't believe that, and it's a very powerful reaction in me when she talks like that. Like this is just not. This isn't. I'm uncomfortable in every aspect of what she's saying here. Something like that, down to my core, and I mean that literally in my chest.
And reacting to what? The fact that the presuppositions are winning?
I think so, yeah. And to me, it comes in just about every word that she said.
Noticing or that how is that present to you?
Yeah, definitely seeing. And but I would say it's just a very little like thinking.
A very little like thinking. That to me that means nothing. That's and it's so deceptively
I remember in the moment going, when she said it's definitely seeing, I was like, okay, we're good. And then she goes back to but it's a little bit of seeing. I thought, oh no, I knew something went wrong, and not in like a me direction sort of way, but just going, I wanted that confirmation that this was a seeing sort of a thing. Again, that's why I asked the question of, how do I ask this? I know, I'm picking up on this, but I just don't have I don't feel like I have the expertise to really, without talking into it, saying, oh, this is the sensory sort of thing, right? This is a seeing sort of a thing. Great, right? You said thinking before, but we're past that. It's not about thinking. And then we get to this point.
I think what I would say is that for me, the presupposition risks of what she says here just are very high, and I feel them in my core. That's a very, very little bit of thinking. What that means is, okay, I can talk about something that's going to align with my presuppositions, and by saying it's a very, very little bit, my presuppositions are going to get their foot in the door, and I guess I feel the attack coming, and that's a deep thing for me. That's all I can say.
That noticing or that how is that present to you?
Yeah, definitely seeing, and but I would say it's just a very little like thinking, like a thinking about it kind of thing, like, oh, that matches. But I wouldn't say it was a whole process and that took over anything. It was just kind of like a thinking about it, very little bit.
So it isn't totally seeing, right? That this is mostly a seeing thing, but that they're.
So I just can't even pay attention to what she says, and so maybe this is an indictment of me as being not a very good listener. Yes, it must be like a heat-seeking missile going after an airplane that's throwing out chaff, throwing out little sparklers or whatever they do, and then when a jet fighter is in a dogfight and somebody's shooting a missile at him and they put out a bunch of hot stuff that the missile is going to go after instead of the exhaust of the airplane. That's what I feel like here. Like she's just throwing out so much stuff that I can't zero in on what she's saying.
Oh, that matches. But I wouldn't say it was a whole process and that took over anything. It was just kind of like a thinking about it, very little bit.
So it isn't totally seeing, right? That this is mostly a seeing thing, but that it's not totally this is not totally seeing. It's not totally just
right.
That.
Yes.
So
yes.
Can I drag my feet a little bit about that? So I'm guessing I'm trying to let my heart cool down here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing that there are going to be people who are watching this and they're going to say, well, you're way off on the wrong track, Robert. And
you're cutting your legs from out of her, right? Like she's telling you, look at how enthusiastic she's saying this is a thinking, right? She's the one saying thinking, right? This is a you problem, right?
Right. So we're going to see what I say in response to that, and then whether we believe her response or whatever.
It's not totally this is not totally seen. It's not totally just
right.
That.
Yes.
So
yes.
Can I drag my feet a little bit about that? So I think it would be possible to see blue here and see blue here, and as part of that seeing, part of those seeings, have some. This is the same blue as that as part of my visual processing. Make it sort of purely visual.
Mm-hmm.
This blue, that blue. Or I could be seeing of this blue and that blue and have some analytical, this is the same blue. So I want us to leave space for the possibility that this is entirely seeing. I'm not trying to say it is the seeing.
Right.
I don't want us to naturally say, well, they're the same. It must be that I have some cognitive comparison going on. I don't want us to do that.
Right. No.
So you think that's a fair question?
I think it's a fair question.
I don't know how much could have improved. The alternative is just to go with her answer. What the most recent answer was, this is a thinking. either you go with that, well, she said it was a thinking, I can write it down, quote, she said it was thinking, therefore I was thinking, this was cognitive. Or you can do something like I just did, which to my ear was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was perfect. There are some things that I could probably improve on if I had the leisure to reach, the leisure of hindsight or whatever. But I thought that was pretty fair. You agree with that? I'm not trying to talk you.
No, I agree. It's coming down to, I think, it goes back to, I think, my original question to you, which is sort of like, after her response, I asked her the first time, how is this present? And she basically describes pretty straightforwardly a visual, sensory sort of a thing, right? Not a cognitive, analytical thing at all. I was trying to find a way of, I don't even know the right word, confirming, or basically kind of saying, this, I'm taking you to be saying this, is that right? And by this meaning, this is like a visual, a noticing of two different blues, but that noticing is a whole visual noticing, right? There's nothing that's evaluative about that or analytical. And basically try to ask her that, because I felt at that moment where I'm like, I got it, but I just didn't know how to do that without also, because the thing that I didn't want to do as well, or what I was aware of is, like you were saying earlier, trying to get my confirmation bias satisfied, where I'm going, okay, this is not thinking at all, right? Like, got it. There, in the moment that there was something about me that said, I don't really know if I have the grounds to do that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But your question was is basically what I wanted to ask. The differences that I was weighing out in my mind and the difference that I wanted her to make, to confirm.
So 2 minutes ago, you said, I think, something like, I thought it was sensory, and I wanted to make sure, or something like that. I'm guessing that part of this series of masterclass lectures is to, when you feel like you know what it is, it's gonna screw you up. It just does. And I'm saying that from personal experience. This is not from, I'm watching Cody and I can see how he gets in trouble when he thinks he knows what he's talking about. But this is from 30 or 40 years of recognizing that whenever I know what I'm talking about, I've got myself in trouble.
Right.
And I guess I can. The cultivation of ignorance is worth the effort. Part of my personal history, I don't know whether I've ever told you this story before. When I cruised through a PhD program in a couple of years, and I didn't have any undergraduate training in psychology, and I thought I was a bit of an imposter because now I got a PhD in something that I had very little training in, and so I took a job where I thought I could teach and learn something while I was doing it. So that's how I got to UNLV, and I taught something like 50 different courses, 40 different classes. I forget, some very big number of classes. Every semester I was doing 3 new classes every semester, and that was on purpose. I wanted to teach stuff until I understood it, basically. And a couple of years into that, I started to think, well, I actually know what psychologists know. I've applied myself at it. I'm a reasonably smart guy. I've applied myself assiduously, read most of the original sources, read what the textbooks say. I got a pretty good idea. And then I spent about a year, just about a full-time year, in a mode of, well, let's see whether I can unlearn everything that I've learned, that I can doubt everything that I've learned. So this is what psychology says. How much of that is actually true, or how much? Because when you learn, when you really pay attention to the discipline like psychology, is that every generation of psychologists says that the previous generation is wrong. So the really smart guy in a previous generation should have been able to say, well, a good 50% of what I'm saying right now is going to be shown to be wrong by the next guy. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what part of it is that I was saying was likely to be judged to be wrong. And then I eventually got over that. I did that for a pretty long time, and it was sort of out of that period that DES came out, because DES is, from my point of view, something like, well, what can you talk about where what you're going to say is going to be as right as you can make it,
mm-hmm.
and you're going to be willing to stand by that 50 years later when another generation comes along and has a different point of view. So that's where DES came from for me. But it's, I'm not suggesting, but you take it that kind of a path. But I would say that the cultivation of, I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about, is worth, that's a skill worth cultivating. People are, and another way of saying that is people are way more complicated than your understanding is going to be, or my understanding is going to be.
Right.
What's actually going on with Amber here is beyond our ken. And we can try to help her tell us something that seems pretty faithful to her experience, and that's about as good as we can do.
What I'm finding myself thinking of too, though, and it is sort of emergent from these masterclass videos, is that like most things, right? I mean, it's complex and both are sort of true, right? I think it's 100% true that you have to question and maybe become especially on notice when you feel confident that you know something, right? In the context of DES, when I'm thinking as an example, right? Maybe as a poor example in this case, but right, if someone's like Amber right here, just previous to this, right, was pretty strongly saying, I'm thinking, right? This is a little bit of thinking, but I'm thinking, right? If I were to just run with that, I'm confident going, well, okay, she's telling me I'm seeing and I'm thinking, so this must be right? Both the things are going on. There's good reason for me to be skeptical of that. There's a lot of reasons why that, you shouldn't go down that path. At the same time, you and I were in agreement, right? Just a few minutes earlier when we were watching whatever conversational turn that was, where she describes what very much sounds like not at all a thinking thing, but a seeing thing. And so I think and we've had conversations, right? Where it's sort of like, if you know what the phenomena is, go for it, right? Or go towards it. And maybe that's the heart of the difficult art of DES interviewing. But the fact that both of those sort of coexist is what is difficult to sort out.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think you're right. I think you're right about that. Yes, it looked like she was talking about seeing. Yes, we should have gone right at it. And while we did that, we should have kept clearly in mind we might very well be on the wrong track.
Right.
And the more it welled up in us, either one of us, that we knew what we were talking about, the more we should have tried to get a disconfirmation thread going.
Right. And I say all this to say, I am not trying to get to the right answer, but more so just right. Like, I think what I'm trying to figure out for myself is how how do you trust that gut feeling in either in both of those situations, right? How do you trust when you say we're off the mark? I hear what Amber's saying. I don't believe anything she's saying, right? I need to work not against that, but work in mind with that and try to figure out what's going on here. And when do I trust saying she's giving me a good answer? That's, you know, that's great. We're on the right. We're heading towards experience.
I don't think I can tell you how to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's more than just. I mean, I think in one manner speaking, it is knowing what is phenomenon and what is not. But also, I think there's more to it than that, too, right? In that, well, yeah.
In my history, which I think applies at least in some degree to you as well, when the signal to me is when I think I'm right. When I think I'm right, I'm probably not right. When I am right, I don't have to think I'm right because I am right. It's when I think I'm right that I'm not right. And so when I feel the urge arise in me or the notion arise in me, oh, I'm right about that. I think that's a pretty good sign that I'm not right.
Meaning it's a me sort of thing, right? I'm saying this is what it is and I feel good about that, right? Versus Amber talking about saying, well, I'm recognizing the color and stuff, right? That's not me saying this is a seeing thing. That's Amber telling me this is a seeing thing.
It's something like this. I don't go around saying, oh, gravity's going downward today. No, I'm right about that. Gravity's a downward thing. I don't have to realize that gravity is downwards. I'm going to walk on the floor, not on the ceiling. And that's organically stamped throughout me. But if I'm saying I am right, that's a different deal.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I'm right about gravity causing me to walk on the floor. It wouldn't occur to me to say that. So if it occurs to me to think I'm right about something, chances are good. At best, I'm only right about it in a manner of speaking. And usually it's just not right, period. So I would say when you feel the I'm right thing arising in you, that's a good sign to be skittish.
And I'm sorry, I'm not meaning try to pin you down to give me the answer here. I think this is a work, this is going to be something that has to be cultivated, right? But it's just, I think this attribute is a really good example, right, of the sort of the major themes we've been talking about all through these conversations.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So let's see what happens to my question here. So I've asked what I think is a pretty good recalibration of the playing field, because so the calibration that I think I was trying to do was that I was worried about what Amber said, that shattered my happiness antennae, and then you bought into it, and that's what forced me into saying something.
Mm-hmm.
Blue and have some analytical, this is the same blue. So I want us to leave space for the possibility that this is entirely seeing. Right? I'm not trying to say it is the seeing. Right. I don't want us to naturally say, well, they're the same. It must be that I have some cognitive comparison going on. I don't want us to do that.
Right. No, that first point that you made sounded more correct. Like, yeah, I was seeing the similar colors and they kind of, or in my opinion, they were similar colors.
My blue registrations, my blue visualization is somehow noticing that it's the same blue over there as it is over here.
Yeah, or like a similar color. Yeah, like it kind of something about it was very cohesive. Yeah.
Okay.
And is there any?
So would I bet the whole ranch that it's not cognitive? Probably not. It seems like it's probably not cognitive much. The problem is that the term cognitive is a problematic thing. You know, the whole definition of cognitive in modern science is how can we talk about experience without talking about experience? I think that's where the whole notion of cognitive psychology came from. Behaviorists said you can't talk about experience, and some people came like, okay, let's talk about cognition.
Yeah.
And we won't have to talk about what people actually are thinking about. We can infer things. So it's a rocky terrain to try to navigate.
Yeah, sometimes I wish we could make up our own words, you know, and talk about it and use that as a gift to differentiate what some of these things are.
Yeah.
Anything else going on at the moment of the beep, Amber?
Nope.
Then I think I'm good.
I'm good too. So we have, I would say we had sort of an interesting discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to say what I was thinking. How much of that is true, I don't actually know, but tried to say what I thought.
Yeah, no, it's at the end of it too. I see the kernels of what she was saying all throughout it. You know, like that's why I think I didn't have any other questions at the end of it too. Not that it really matters why I did what I did or whatever, but you know, watching this now, I'm kind of going, yeah, you know, like this kind of seemed to be a visual sort of thing all along. I think, you know, obviously anyone could say whatever they want. Someone could come along and say, well, you talked her into it being visual, but going back and reviewing the tape, I'm actually pretty convinced that, you know, that was a good deal.
So what in general has happened, despite the fact that we put a lot of this stuff out on the web and I've written a lot of transcripts and all that, there has been remarkably little folk who have come along and say, well, look, you guys are badgering the witness. People will say you badger the witness without ever having looked at the tape. But they don't say you're badgering the witness after having looked at the tape. So, you know, I think there are probably interesting conversations to be had with good-hearted people who have different interpretations about things that are actually happening, and which is why I guess why I think the masterclass format is sort of an interesting thing. We're at least having a conversation about an event that actually took place. This is not an abstract conversation about DES.
Right.
This is a concrete conversation about Amber and Cody and Russ at 2:17 in the afternoon of today, whenever it was, and my guess is if we went back and replayed my conversation, my leveling the playing field deal, and if you look at that just from the standpoint of here's Russ trying to convey that he wants to get it right, and not much more than that. It's a and from my point of view, it is a display of genuine interest. I would like to know what's happening here, and I've got to put that into words because we're interacting in words. But the words are, it could be this, it could be that. I don't know. I would like to know. I would genuinely like to know. I'm doing the best I can to help you without pushing you, without pulling you. Not much more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's probably a good enough. We've probably been at this for an hour or so. And,
Yeah, it looks like it.
any benedictory comments here? And
No, well, I mean, again, feel free to. You can, I think we found a good place to clip the video if you wanted to. But I'm more just curious. In that period where you were learning to unlearn what you've learned, what did that involve, really?
I think it involved, I would give a lecture, which was my job, and then I would examine how much of that I thought was truly believable. So I just told these kids what I was supposed to tell them. And then I would ponder that, is he telling the truth? Is that really right? Is he going to believe that in 10 years?
Mm.
And I think I did that pretty much every lecture, every day. Standing in the grocery line, thinking about what I said in the grocery checkout, thinking about what I had said that day.
Yeah. No, I was just curious as to the thinking about unlearning things in a lot of different ways. And I wasn't, I was curious if there was a specific kind of approach you had taken to that. But at the same time, that probably is the only way you can unlearn it, right? Is just to think about it a lot and be critical.
Yeah. We're talking quite a few years ago, so probably, and what I think about recollection for reflections. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I do think it's a fair characterization that I spent the better part of a year. The grocery store line, I think actually was, if I thought about that hard enough, was when I recognized that I understood what psychologists knew. So after I'd been here teaching for 3 or 4 years, standing in a grocery store line, I know what the discipline of psychology is about. I now have taught almost all of the courses that the university teaches in psychology, and I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. Mm-hmm. And then I think my world started turning around. Now that I know that stuff, well, how much of it was actually true.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not recommending that as a.
Yeah, no, we had talked before. You had mentioned before about the teaching of different classes and taking a different approach every semester. But we that was the first I was hearing of sort of like how that went on for a little bit more time, what that sort of entailed, and then how that impacted, where DES came from. That's new to me.
I do think DES comes out of that. I think it's not accidental. That I think the modern university professor is encouraged to teach as few courses as he or she can get away with. And my path was to teach as many courses as I could possibly do. And
and the thing that emerged from that, right, was the only thing, I mean, it makes sense, right? But again, it's like sort of the only thing that remained at the end of that day was the phenomena.
For me,
right.
I think that's true. Somebody else doing the same thing, maybe when I was end up somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right, onward and upward.
Yeah, and this reminds me too. One last thing, I don't think I told you this actually, but I have. Oh no, I think I did mention that I have gotten involved in the APA, the larger APA sort of leadership. In the process over these past few weeks, I've somehow ended up being the student representative for the Practice Leadership Conference. I don't know if you've heard about it before, but it's the, APAs, they throw it every spring and they invite people to DC and talking about lobbying and leadership and things like that. But now, I think at the time when I mentioned getting involved in APA, you and I had a conversation around what my perspective might be like, right, in terms of a more bureaucratic sort of system, right, and what would that be like, and who would I be interacting with, and what would that all be? I think people are very receptive to DES. I mean, it actually had come up in some of our meetings where we were sort of socializing, and we were talking about what research we did, and people were interested in DES within our student group. But I think even when it came to the larger, what's now for me, APA meetings with non-students and psychologists, I do think DES is something valuable to offer as a way of sort of seeing the world. I find that there is that natural urge in psychology or psychologists to go towards, to veer towards let's go to the general, let's go to the right, let's go to all these big, when we talk about diversity, let's talk about diversity in a very broad and sort of ambiguous way. And my view of it is, well, let's talk about like one specific actionable bill or actionable, suggestion that we can make and really focus our energies on that. And I'm not saying that's necessarily always the best too, but it is an interesting process to view all of that.
Well, I'm glad you're involved in that organization, because I think if you're paying attention to what's going on there, you're going to be presented with real world conflicts and real world differences of opinions and whatever, and taking those kinds of things seriously and profiting from them is a worthwhile endeavor.
It does feel like I sort of infiltrated the castle in a way, but it is interesting to see. And
as far as DES is concerned, I think most people on the planet really do think that they really are interested in what other people think and feel, and DES just tries to take that seriously. There's nothing magic about it.
Yeah, and I think that's why DES is a lot more pop appeal than to a researcher, to a theorist trying to make sense of all of it.
We'll see.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Thank you. And yeah, that's it for me.
All right.
All right. Thanks.